Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Labyrinth from 1986. Regardless of what you think of the quality of the film Labyrinth, there really isn't another film like it. You can say Dark Crystal sort of is, but both Dark Crystal and Labyrinth are kind of on their own in big budget productions that are majorly cast with puppets. I guess you could say these two films are really like how you have a big director and then they go off and do the film they're passionate about, the second sophomore effort like a Magnolia or something like that. Before these, the only feature film, he had done shorts theatrically. The only feature film he had directed was The Great Muppet Caper, and then the other two were Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. All three are completely different from one another, but the real auteur of Jim Henson, who is very much an auteur if you really think about it, is that both this and Dark Crystal feel like their own separate kind of version of Jim Henson. And while I was watching this film, I was thinking, most of these effects were in camera with the exception of the groundbreaking owl at the beginning of the film. Not so much now, but at the time it was a major computer effect that had never been done before. I don't believe it was Pixar. I'm not sure exactly who did it, but I know Lucasfilm released this and they did also own Pixar, I believe, at the time. So theoretically, I understand why you could think that. I'm not sure. Probably someone is going to know in the comments. But most of this film are in camera effects. And that this being in 1986, it's interesting to think about Lucasfilm in the 80s and what Lucas was doing and what Hollywood was doing in the 80s, because that's really kind of the end of in-camera effects. We're seeing that kind of come back now with Mad Max Fury Road, and Star Wars Force Awakens did a lot more in-camera stuff than we have been used to recently in Hollywood. But there's probably never going to be a Hollywood production with this much in-camera effects or stuff practically done on set as it was done in Labyrinth ever again. So this is kind of a film that you can say things about the story and the acting and things of that nature, but I really have to preface that this is probably one of the most unique films ever made. And I'm not saying that to overrate this film. I think most of this, if you like this movie, you might not like the rest of this review, but the way I look at this film is the same way I look at animated films that have a very different character design or a different kind of animation. And even if the story, and most of the time, the story isn't the greatest, but I'm still in awe at the visual feast that I've been invited to and how amazing it is just to see a different kind of movie. And plot-wise, maybe this isn't, but visually, it's just a really beautiful, amazing, different kind of movie. And that's why we're still talking about it, why when David Bowie died recently, most people were talking about Labyrinth, because I hadn't seen this since I was a kid, and I still distinctly remember shots of this movie. And even thinking about it, most of what I'm thinking about are, in fact, the visuals. I still think that says something about the power of him as a director and the power of visuals in cinema, that you could make something that people are going to remember 30 years from now, probably more than movies that I like a lot more, just because how wonderful and amazing and unique the visuals are. No one really makes darker kind of kids movies, and in the 80s that seemed to be more of a thing, frankly, and darker kids movies with a unique twist on them, with this many puppets and complex puppets as they've made, and probably some of the most complex puppets we'll ever see in a motion picture ever in the history of cinema. So when you think about all that, Labyrinth is a very unique, amazing movie, and it kind of fits into being a cult classic, because cult classics are supposed to be unique, different movies. They're not supposed to be the norm. They're not supposed to be a genre. They can be a twist on a genre or whatever, but it's supposed to be a unique kind of cinematic experience, and Labyrinth fits in that very well. In fact, it's probably one of the most unique cinematic experiences that normal kind of moviegoers who aren't seeing Pink Flamingos or the weirder cult movies will kind of go down. It's nice to have those avenues opened up, even though Jim Henson was the only one going down them. And this isn't the tightest script. This plot makes no sense. There are parts that are so memorable, like Dance Magic Dance, and then there's the things with the red Muppet things that look really green screen and didn't even fit in the movie, and you're wondering why they even kept it in, because it has no real value in the rest of the plot of the film. It's so uneven, it's so all over the place, but it's so unique that anytime you mention Labyrinth, you're going to remember images from it. As much as I don't like to do that, there's something you kind of can't discount about that. A girl named Sarah, she is a theater actress, or she paid a lot of money to make a novelty playbill with her picture on it. She is hanging out with her English sheepdog, Merlin, and then realizes she has to go babysit her baby brother, and she is forced to by her stepmother, who she hates for seemingly no reason to us as an audience, but apparently is really bad or something. They never really prove that to us. It's like going to a kid's house and they're just yelling at their mom the whole time, and you're like, I mean, it feels like you're the evil one. Maybe that's the twist. Anyway, twist of that kid, you don't want to go to their house anymore. And her parents, who even note that they never get to go out that much, but she says they do anyway. So I have a lot of sympathy for the parents. They probably work hard for this bratty theater kid, and they had to pay for a novelty playbill or something. I think she's done some plays, but it just feels like she has a really great bedroom, and she should maybe, drop her white privilege a little and appreciate the situation she's in. I mean, she has to babysit one night, and the kid's gonna go to sleep. She can just read poetry in the living room. I'm just saying, I take the parents' side when I'm older. It's just like, what was wrong with the stepmom? She made her babysit. I bet they're even gonna pay her and buy her pizza if she asked. She was nicer about it. I'm just saying, kids, rant. I'm letting it go. She decides to send her brother to the Goblin King, which is something she just decides to make up for some reason. And then the goblins wake up and take her baby brother, so she has to go and get her brother back from the Goblin King, but he makes her go through a labyrinth that he's built because he's a dick and doesn't want to make it easy to get to his house for some reason. So she goes on a magical journey to get her brother back and meets many different interesting characters along the way. One of the biggest things about this movie is how many amazing people collaborated on this film. You know that Jim Henson directed it. You know David Bowie's in it. Brian Froud, who is a conceptual designer, helped design it. And then you also know that Terry Jones, formerly of Monty Python, wrote the screenplay. That's not entirely true, although he is the one credited in the film. A lot of people helped write the screenplay, including Laura Phillips, who had written several Fraggle Rock episodes, Dennis Lee, who was a children's story writer or a children's book writer, I believe, and George Lucas, and Elaine May, who was a director in her own right. And they all worked on it, as well as Terry Jones, who turned in various drafts and collaborated on them, and then apparently they kept going back from like 1983 till production in 1985. And Terry Jones, it seems like his voice comes through the most in this, and a lot of the dry British wit feels like something from him, knowing him as a writer and Monty Python and such. The other thing that's interesting is, and I've noticed this when you actually hear how many people wrote a film and what you understand to be the lead voice, sometimes you'll just put those ideas on that writer, even though that's not actually true. So I think that's a lot of what's going on here, because he seems to think that a lot of his ideas were changed, and it was even changed again when David Bowie wanted to rewrite, when he got involved and almost pulled out of doing it because of that. And Lucas apparently was more involved than we realized. Lucas actually was in the editing room a lot. This was released by Lucasfilm, and him and Henson were going back between cuts and disagreeing and agreeing, and it was kind of all over the place. But it's interesting, George Lucas is only credited as executive producer, and it feels like he had a lot more involvement than your typical executive producer. Actually, the other film he helped make that came out a couple months later after this film was Howard the Duck. Both of these movies bombed. Probably not a great time to work at Lucasfilm. This movie lived on a lot better than Howard the Duck, at least from my perspective. It's interesting how many voices were involved in this, and it's also interesting to think how completely messy the story is. The flow of this film just frankly just doesn't work. As a story, it's both simple but incredibly plot-centric. Plot-centric to the point that you don't really know the character of Sarah at all. The performance of Jennifer Connelly, I think doesn't work because she's acting off puppets and she doesn't have the charisma, I think, frankly, to get that performance to really work. Whereas David Bowie's performance has a lot of charisma. I don't think that was a really easy thing to do for any actor, especially at the time, because this was also pre-green screen acting. So actors who are much better at it now, and there's like training and there's acting coaches, at this time they had to kind of figure it out themselves. I also think the thing with the character of Sarah and Jennifer Connelly's performance is that there's just like not that much there. Suddenly she's in this weird world going on this labyrinth, and she's not this bratty theater girl anymore. She's like suddenly grown up and kind of mature and making these decisions, and you don't get to see her grow throughout the film. It felt like they were more interested in her journey through the labyrinth and not so much her emotional journey. And a lot of people bring up that there's a metaphor in the idea that she's becoming a woman and going through puberty and such. I get that, but it's like, isn't that like every hero's journey when you have a young protagonist? I mean, that's not like a very unique thing. Even in the Wikipedia and most articles I read about it, they're like, some of the critics got what this film was really about. And I'm like, yeah, some of them. It wasn't like a complex political satire on the Reagan and Thatcher administrations, and it was just hidden in there and a few people got it. Maybe it was. It's clearly obviously there, and I think that's the thing with this film, is like, the plot isn't really what you take away from it. It's the amazing puppets and the amazing technical aspects of it is what you take away from it. And when I was a kid, I had a really cool babysitter who one time time brought over Labyrinth and another time brought over Dark Crystal. But I always thought when I was a kid that Dark Crystal was the movie that bombed and Labyrinth was the movie that succeeded, because Labyrinth has people in it and David Bowie and Jennifer Connelly, and how could this movie bomb? And it's like the reverse, basically. It's the complete reverse, is that Dark Crystal did well and this bombed, although it opened against Karate Kid 2, so maybe that had something to do with it, although Karate Kid Part 2 kind of sucks, so I don't know why anyone would see that over this. While I was watching it, seeing all those technical aspects to it, seeing the amazing conceptual designs and the set designs and like how beautiful and how much time and effort went into this, and even the character of like Hoggle is like an incredibly advanced, amazing puppet, and I think it's probably one of the greatest creations they'd ever make, and it's kind of sad that failed, because I kind of think about what the next film could have been. When you get into this style, there's not many places to go, which I think has caused all the fandom, because you kind of wish there was more. When I was a kid, I loved this movie and read books about Jim Henson, but I was just obsessed, and I think this movie had a lot to do with it, because it's very memorable, and I don't think at the time I was thinking about, it has kind of a weak script. David Bowie's involvement is interesting. I should say that's probably why I'm reviewing this, because when he died, at first I was annoyed that people were like, David Bowie has such a great career, film, music, everything, and when he died and people were like the Goblin King and stuff, first I was like, oh, that's the only fucking thing you remember, you fucking ignorant idiots. But I kind of thought about how cool it was, because most of those films are very unique, whether he's playing Pontius Pilate or he's in The Last Man on Earth or the Ziggy Stardust concert documentary by D.A. Pennybecker, which is amazing. Almost all his performances are unique. Like, they're very unique movies. There's like only one or two movies like them. For him to be involved in this film, which originally they wanted like people like Michael Jackson, Mick Jagger, they wanted a rock star with a lot of charisma, and Jim Henson really wanted Sting. But apparently his kids convinced him that David Bowie would have more lasting star power over the years, and I think he definitely did, because I don't think many people who watch YouTube or would be watching this video frankly give a fuck about Sting, and also I don't think Sting would have given as good of a performance as David Bowie did. David Bowie's very theatrical, he has such great presence about him, it works so well for the Goblin King, just like naturally, and he does have the best performance in this film. Some of the times it is a little awkward, he has trouble acting off Hoggle, but most of the time he's acting off of Jennifer Connelly, a luxury she did not have because she has more screen time. I know it's a creepier, weirder performance, but he's kind of using that in an interesting way, in that when you're a kid, adult sexuality feels strange and weird, and you don't understand it, and you think you get it, but you don't. It's just ununderstandable. And having someone whose sexuality is very ambiguous, like David Bowie, having him play the villain in this film is done completely purposeful, and it's so smart in that way. I'm not saying like they're doing it out of like gay people are strange and stuff like that. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, when you don't understand sexuality and the complexity of sexuality, and you're a kid and you look at someone like David Bowie, who's a full-grown adult who's very comfortable in his sexuality, it confuses you and you're not exactly sure. That's the whole idea of putting him in this film, and I think it uses that rock star mystique. David Bowie had a good film career. This reflects his smart choices, because this is a unique movie. This is a one-of-a-kind thing. For him to star in this and make songs for this and do Dance Magic Dance and other songs, it shows how smart he was. At least he tried to do things that were different and unique. I think his involvement in this film made this film a lot better because of it. Dance Magic Dance has so much great in-camera stuff going on with it. It's kind of amazing, like, he gives such a good performance in that scene. He's a much more experienced actor than Jennifer Connelly's at this point, that he can navigate through all of that and do a decent performance that's very memorable. Says a lot about him. When I was watching it, I was like, I totally would remember him throughout this whole thing, and all the technical aspects that are going on behind him. There was a juggler moving those like glass balls throughout the whole movie. That's not actually Bowie's hand, that's that juggler's hand, and he's sitting right beside him, and Bowie gets that to work. Like, Bowie is perfect for this kind of movie. I will always remember parts of this film, and will always remember images from this film, and it's a weird movie to review because there's a lot of things that are going on with it are incredibly memorable and probably imprinted on my brain for a very long time. But story-wise and watching it, it's so uneven, and it's so all over the place that you kind of just go, what the hell is this sometimes? And there's certain segments that just don't really need to be in there. I don't understand how this was a film that went back and forth between cuts between two of the most creative minds of our time, like George Lucas and Jim Henson, and this came out is kind of like, okay guys, I guess. I mean, it wasn't peak creative time for Lucas, but this movie is kind of a unique artifact in itself, and it's just kind of amazing it got made. And a lot of time live action films film can't really do that for me the same way animation can, where I'll see an animated film and I'll kind of just love it for the characters' designs. And this is one of the few films where I was still so interested in, like, God, no wonder this took 5 months to make. It probably should have taken even more. It's just so technically impressive. I feel like it pushed motion picture into something that it never got back to. And maybe you think maybe it never should. Maybe that shouldn't have happened. But it's interesting where Jim Henson's imagination could go and how he could direct such a unique vision of a movie. I do hate when people are like, oh, it's unique, it's original, so therefore it's better. I'm not really saying that, but I'm saying this is unique and original enough of a vision to at least look at it from that angle as a much more stronger suit. Whether this is good or bad, script-wise, it's not a good movie. I mean, it just isn't. It's not a very solid film. But as a film in itself, there's something you can't escape about this movie. There's something I'll always remember about this movie. As the David Bowie stuff kept coming and there's more and more Labyrinth stuff, I started going, maybe I would like to watch it again. And watching again was fine, but maybe in 15 to 20 years I'll watch it again, but I don't really need to. Partly because I remember it, partly because it's not that good. It's not a great movie. It's not going to go on the best films of the 80s, but I understand the nostalgia for it because it's a unique experience you're never going to have again, and probably never will. They'll never make another movie like this. And when I watch Labyrinth, that's probably more of my takeaway. Maybe that's a weak kind of, I'm just lowballing this review or something. And I think a lot of people do lowball their opinion of it, because if you really sit down with it, you're going to be like, this isn't that good, but I mean, it's kind of cool and weird. And you kind of have to just go with the cool and weirdness of it. Just accept that, hey, it's very good at its cool and weirdness, and it's very unique in its cool and weirdness, and there's no other movie like it. And a lot of times I think when people say that about a certain movie, it just doesn't have enough unique and weird to get that to work, to make you sit down with it every now and then. And I think Labyrinth, regardless of its many, many flaws, actually does make you want to sit down with it now and then and experience and just see like all these puppeteers and Jim Henson at the top of his game. And it's still an experience that every film goer should have at least once. So if you have seen Labyrinth and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.